At 6 feet 9 inches tall, with shoulders that could block out the sun, Marcus Kane had spent his entire life watching people step aside when he walked into a room. His massive frame cast shadows that seemed to swallow the light around him, and his steel-gray eyes held an intensity that made most folks look away after just a few seconds. But it wasn't his size alone that made people nervous. It was the way he moved through the world like he owned every inch of it, like everything and everyone was his to command and control. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Standing at the edge of Harbor Falls' main pier, Marcus gripped the shipping manifest that would change everything. The salt air whipped through his dark hair as he watched the morning fog roll in from the Atlantic, carrying with it the scent of storms and secrets. At 32, he'd built an empire from nothing, turning a single fishing boat into the largest maritime shipping operation on the entire eastern seaboard. But success had come with a price that he was only beginning to understand. This morning would mark the beginning of a journey that would test everything he thought he knew about power, possession, and the dangerous territory of the human heart. Some men are born to take what they want. Others learn that the thing's worth having can't be taken at all. This is the story of a man who thought his strength gave him the right to claim anything he desired, until he met the one woman who would teach him that true power comes from knowing when to let go. The November wind cut across Harbor Falls like a blade, carrying the promise of an early winter that would test even the hardiest souls along the Maine coast. Marcus Kane pulled his black wool coat tighter as he walked down the weathered planks of the Maine wharf, his heavy boots echoing against the wood with the rhythm of a man who'd never learned to tread lightly. The town spread before him in the pre-dawn darkness, a collection of white clapboard houses and brick buildings that seemed to huddle together against the approaching storm clouds, gathering on the horizon. Marcus had been awake since 4 in the morning, poring over reports in his office above the harbor master's station. His shipping company, Kane Maritime, controlled every major freight route from Boston to Bar Harbor, and the numbers showed another record-breaking quarter. At 32, he commanded a fleet of 18 vessels and employed over 200 men across 6 coastal ports. His success had made him wealthy beyond most people's dreams, but wealth had never been his primary motivation. Control was what Marcus craved. The ability to command his environment, to ensure that nothing happened in his world without his knowledge and approval. He'd learned early that chaos was the enemy of security, and security was the only thing that mattered when you'd grown up with nothing but uncertainty and abandonment. His father had disappeared when Marcus was 8, leaving behind only debts and empty promises. His mother had worked herself into an early grave trying to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. By the time Marcus turned 16, he'd sworn that he would never again be at the mercy of forces beyond his control. The harbor was beginning to stir with the first signs of morning activity. Fishing boats prepared for their daily runs, while dock workers gathered around steaming cups of coffee, their breath visible in the cold air. Marcus surveyed his domain with the satisfaction of a man who'd built everything he could see with his own hands and iron will. Every ship, every warehouse, every contract bore his personal stamp of approval. Nothing moved through Harbor Falls without Marcus Kane's say-so. But this morning felt different. There was an electricity in the air that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. A sense of impending change that made Marcus restless in ways he couldn't quite identify. He'd felt it for weeks now, a growing dissatisfaction with routines that had once brought him comfort. Success, he was discovering, could become its own kind of prison when there were no new territories left to conquer. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the pier behind him. Marcus turned to see Tom Bradley, his operations manager, approaching with the morning's shipping reports. At 55, Tom was one of the few men in Harbor Falls who wasn't intimidated by Marcus's imposing presence. He'd worked for Kane Maritime since its early days, when the company consisted of nothing but Marcus, a single cargo vessel, and enough determination to move mountains. "Morning, boss," Tom called out, his weathered face creased with what might have been concern. "Got some news that might interest you. The Clearwater Inn is changing hands. Old Mrs. Patterson finally decided to sell after her husband passed last spring." Marcus accepted the shipping manifest Tom offered, but his attention was caught by this unexpected development. The Clearwater Inn occupied prime real estate on Harbor Falls Main Street, a 3-story Victorian building that had served as the town's premier lodging establishment for over 50 years. Its position made it valuable not just as a business, but as a strategic asset for anyone looking to control the flow of visitors and commerce through the town. "Who's buying it?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected he knew the answer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There were only a handful of people in Harbor Falls with the capital necessary for such a purchase, and Marcus Kane topped that list by a considerable margin. "That's the interesting part," Tom replied, pulling out a folded newspaper clipping. "It's not a local buyer. Some woman from New York City put in the winning bid, paid cash, above asking price, no conditions. Mrs. Patterson said she'd never seen anything like it." Marcus felt his jaw tighten as he read the brief article Tom had brought. A New York buyer meant outside money, outside influence, outside control. It meant someone with their own agenda moving into his territory without his knowledge or approval. The very idea of an unknown entity establishing themselves in Harbor Falls without consulting him first struck Marcus as both insulting and potentially dangerous. "What do we know about this buyer?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the edge that Tom had learned to recognize as a warning sign. "Not much yet," Tom admitted. "Name on the deed is Emma Claire Whitmore. The real estate agent mentioned she's some kind of business consultant from Manhattan. Apparently, she's planning to renovate the place and reopen it as a boutique hotel with some fancy restaurant attached. Emma Claire Whitmore." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but the implications of her presence in Harbor Falls were already taking shape in his mind. A sophisticated New York businesswoman with enough capital to make cash purchases above market value represented exactly the kind of outside influence that could disrupt the careful balance of power he'd spent years establishing. Harbor Falls was his town, its economy dependent on his shipping operations, its prosperity tied directly to his success. The arrival of an independent operator with her own resources and agenda could complicate that arrangement considerably. "When does she take possession?" Marcus asked, already formulating plans to address this unexpected development. "End of the week," Tom replied. "Word is she's driving up from New York herself to oversee the transition personally. Mrs. Patterson mentioned she seemed very particular about wanting to handle everything directly rather than working through agents or contractors. The information suggested someone accustomed to maintaining control over her own affairs, a personality trait that Marcus could appreciate even as he recognized the potential conflicts it might create. Independent operators were unpredictable, resistant to the kind of collaborative relationships that kept Harbor Falls running smoothly under his guidance. Marcus handed the shipping reports back to Tom without reviewing them, his mind already focused on more pressing concerns. "I want to know everything about Emma Whitmore by the time she arrives. Business background, financial resources, previous investments, personal connections, everything." Tom nodded with the understanding of someone who'd executed similar requests many times before. Marcus Kane didn't like surprises, and he particularly didn't like surprises that involved his territory being invaded by unknown quantities with substantial resources and unclear intentions. The morning routine continued with its usual efficiency as Marcus made his rounds through the various Kane maritime facilities scattered around the harbor. The main shipping office occupied a converted warehouse that had been Marcus's first major purchase after his company began generating serious profits. The building's exposed brick walls and heavy timber construction reflected the no-nonsense functionality that characterized all of Marcus's business operations. Inside, a dozen employees were already at work coordinating shipping schedules, managing cargo manifests, and handling the hundreds of details that kept Marcus's maritime empire running smoothly. The office had an atmosphere of focused intensity that reflected its owner's personality. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation, no tolerance for anything less than complete efficiency. Marcus's private office occupied the building's second floor, its windows offering a commanding view of the entire harbor. The space was spartanly furnished with heavy wooden furniture that could accommodate his massive frame, and the walls were covered with nautical charts showing every shipping route under Kane Maritime's control. A large safe dominated one corner, containing the contracts and financial documents that represented Marcus's life's work. He settled behind his desk and opened the morning's correspondence, but found himself unable to concentrate on routine business matters. The news about Emma Whitmore had triggered something deeper than mere professional concern. There was a possessiveness in Marcus's reaction that went beyond simple territorial instincts, though he couldn't yet identify its source. Harbor Falls had been his domain for over a decade. Every business owner knew that Marcus Kane's approval was essential for long-term success in the local economy. Every major decision affecting the town's development eventually found its way to his desk for consultation. He'd achieved this influence, not through intimidation or coercion, but through the simple reality that his shipping operations were essential to the town's prosperity. When Marcus Kane prospered, Harbor Falls prospered. When he faced challenges, the entire community felt the effects. This symbiotic relationship had created a stability that Marcus treasured above all else. He knew every business owner personally, understood their needs and limitations, and could predict their responses to changing circumstances. The arrival of an outside operator with independent resources threatened to disrupt these carefully cultivated relationships in ways that Marcus found deeply unsettling. His contemplation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Sarah Martinez, his executive assistant, entered with the morning's priority messages. At 28, Sarah had worked for Kane Maritime for 3 years, proving herself to be both competent and discreet in handling the sensitive information that crossed Marcus's desk daily. "Mr. Kane," Sarah said, setting a stack of messages on his desk, "you have a call from the Harbor Falls Planning Commission. They want to discuss the zoning variance for the new warehouse expansion." Marcus nodded, but his attention was caught by something else entirely. Through his office windows, he could see a sleek black sedan pulling into the parking area beside the Clearwater Inn. Even from a distance, there was something about the vehicle that suggested expensive taste and serious money. The car's new York license plates confirmed what Marcus had already begun to suspect. "Sarah," he said, rising from his chair and moving to the window for a better view, "cancel my 10 o'clock meeting. I have something more pressing to attend to." Emma Claire. Whitmore had arrived in Harbor Falls 3 days ahead of schedule. Marcus watched from his second-floor vantage point as the sedan's door opened, and a woman emerged with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command. Even at a distance, her presence was immediately apparent. She moved with the confident stride of someone who'd never learned to doubt her place in the world, surveying the Clearwater Inn with the analytical gaze of an investor evaluating assets. She was tall for a woman, probably 5 feet 8 inches, with auburn hair that caught the morning light like burnished copper. Her clothing was clearly expensive but practical, suggesting someone who understood that success required both style and substance. Even from his distant observation point, Marcus could sense an intelligence and determination that reminded him uncomfortably of his own approach to business challenges. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the inn to greet her new buyer, and Marcus found himself studying the interaction with unwavering attention. Emma Whitmore's body language suggested polite interest, combined with absolute confidence in her own judgment. She asked questions, took notes, and examined details with the thoroughness of someone who left nothing to chance. There was something mesmerizing about watching her work. She moved through the property inspection with systematic efficiency, but there was an elegance to her movements that Marcus found oddly compelling. When she laughed at something Mrs. Patterson said, the sound carried across the harbor with a warmth that seemed to brighten the gray morning. Marcus realized he'd been standing at the window for nearly 20 minutes, completely absorbed in observing a woman he'd never met. The intensity of his interest was both surprising and somewhat disturbing. He prided himself on maintaining emotional distance from business matters, yet something about Emma Whitmore had captured his attention in ways that transcended mere professional curiosity. "Sarah," he called to his assistant, who was still organizing messages at his desk, "I'll be out for the rest of the morning. Handle any urgent matters yourself and reschedule everything else until this afternoon." Without waiting for a response, Marcus grabbed his coat and headed for the door. Emma Whitmore represented a potential disruption to the carefully ordered world he'd spent years creating. The responsible thing to do was introduce himself, assess her intentions, and establish the kind of working relationship that would prevent future conflicts. At least that's what Marcus told himself as he crossed the harbor district with purposeful strides, his attention focused entirely on the auburn-haired woman who'd somehow managed to disturb his peace of mind without speaking a single word. The November air carried the scent of brine and approaching weather as Marcus made his way along Harbor Falls' main street. The town was beginning to stir with its usual morning rhythms, shop owners unlocking their doors and early customers making their way to Davidson's Bakery for fresh coffee and conversation. Marcus acknowledged the greetings he received with polite nods, but his attention remained focused on the Clearwater Inn and its new owner. As he approached the Victorian building, Marcus could hear Emma Whitmore's voice drifting through the open front door. She was discussing renovation plans with Mrs. Patterson, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected millions of dollars. There was no hesitation in her speech, no deference to local customs or established ways of doing things. She spoke like a woman who'd never encountered an obstacle she couldn't overcome through intelligence and determination. "The restaurant will specialize in locally sourced seafood with contemporary preparation techniques," Emma was saying as Marcus reached the inn's front porch. "I want to create a destination dining experience that draws visitors from Boston and Portland while serving the local community's needs for special occasions." Marcus paused at the entrance, struck by the ambition implicit in her plans. A destination restaurant would bring outside visitors to Harbor Falls, people with money to spend and expectations to meet. It could provide economic benefits for the entire town, but it would also introduce variables that Marcus couldn't control or predict. He stepped through the doorway into the Clearwater Inn's lobby, and his first close look at Emma Whitmore hit him like a physical blow. She was even more striking than he'd realized from his distant observation, with emerald green eyes that missed nothing and a smile that could probably convince skeptics to invest their life savings in questionable ventures. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical style that emphasized high cheekbones and the kind of bone structure that belonged in magazine advertisements. But it was her presence that truly commanded attention. Emma Whitmore filled the space around her with an energy that made everyone else seem slightly diminished by comparison. When she spoke, people listened. When she moved, eyes followed. There was something magnetic about her that went beyond mere physical beauty, though Marcus had to admit that her beauty was considerable. "Mr. Kane," Mrs. Patterson said, noticing his arrival with obvious surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here this morning. Emma, I'd like you to meet Marcus Kane. He owns Kane Maritime, the shipping company that pretty much runs this entire harbor." Emma turned to face him, and Marcus felt the full impact of her attention, like a spotlight suddenly focused in his direction. Her green eyes met his gray ones with unwavering directness, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus was accustomed to people being intimidated by his size and presence, but Emma Whitmore showed no signs of being impressed or concerned by either. "Mr. Kane," she said, extending her hand with the confidence of someone closing million-dollar deals on a regular basis. "Emma Whitmore. I've heard quite a bit about your operations here in Harbor Falls." Marcus took her offered hand, noting that her grip was firm without being aggressive, professional without being cold. Her skin was soft, but her handshake suggested someone accustomed to physical work as well as boardroom negotiations. The contact lasted perhaps 3 seconds longer than strictly necessary, though Marcus couldn't say which of them was responsible for the delay. "Miss Whitmore," Marcus replied, his deep voice carrying more warmth than he'd intended. "Welcome to Harbor Falls. I understand you're planning some significant changes to the Clearwater Inn." "Substantial improvements," Emma corrected with a smile that suggested she'd already anticipated his concerns. "I believe this property has tremendous potential that hasn't been fully realized. With the right investments and management, it could become a significant asset for the entire community." The comment was diplomatically phrased, but Marcus caught the underlying message. Emma Whitmore wasn't just buying a business. She was positioning herself as a major player in Harbor Falls' economic future. Her confidence suggested someone who'd succeeded in similar ventures before, and saw no reason why this should be any different. "That's an ambitious vision," Marcus said carefully. "Harbor Falls is a small community with established rhythms and relationships. Changes need to be implemented thoughtfully to avoid disrupting the balance that keeps everything working smoothly." Emma's eyes sparked with what might have been amusement or challenge. "Mr. Kane, in my experience, communities that resist change usually discover that change happens anyway, just not on their terms. I prefer to be proactive rather than reactive when it comes to business development." The exchange was polite on the surface, but Marcus recognized it as the opening moves in a much larger game. Emma Whitmore was establishing that she wouldn't be seeking his permission or approval for her plans, while he was making it clear that Harbor Falls operated according to certain unspoken rules that newcomers ignored at their own risk. Mrs. Patterson seemed oblivious to the undercurrents in their conversation, chattering cheerfully about renovation timelines and local contractors. But Marcus was acutely aware of the tension building between himself and Emma, a combination of mutual assessment and something else that he couldn't quite identify. "Perhaps you'd join me for coffee sometime this week," Marcus suggested, his tone making it sound more like a friendly invitation than the business meeting he actually had in mind. "I'd be happy to share some insights about the local market and business environment." Emma tilted her head slightly, studying his face with the analytical gaze of someone trying to read between the lines. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Kane. I'm sure your perspective would be valuable. Though I should mention that I generally prefer to form my own opinions about business opportunities rather than relying on others' assessments." The polite rebuff was delivered with such charm that it took Marcus a moment to recognize it as a rebuff at all. Emma Whitmore was making it clear that she didn't need his guidance or approval, but she was doing it in a way that avoided direct confrontation. It was a masterful display of diplomatic skill that impressed Marcus even as it frustrated him. "Of course," Marcus replied, maintaining his own diplomatic facade. "I wouldn't presume to tell you how to run your business. I'm simply offering to share some local knowledge that might save you time and effort as you get established." "I appreciate that," Emma said, though her tone suggested she was perfectly capable of acquiring whatever knowledge she needed without assistance. "Harbor Falls seems like a wonderful community. I'm looking forward to becoming part of it." The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering topics like renovation timelines, local suppliers, and staffing requirements. But Marcus found himself paying more attention to Emma's voice than her words, noting the slight New York accent that gave her speech a sophisticated edge, the way she gestured with her hands when making important points, and the occasional laugh. That seemed to light up the entire room. There was something about Emma Whitmore that demanded attention in ways Marcus couldn't quite explain. She wasn't the most beautiful woman he'd ever encountered, though she was certainly striking. She wasn't the most charming, though her charm was considerable. What set her apart was an indefinable quality that made her presence feel significant, as if important things happened wherever she happened to be. By the time Marcus left the Clearwater Inn, he'd learned that Emma planned to take possession of the property the following Monday, begin renovations immediately, and have the restaurant operational within 3 months. Her timeline was aggressive, but seemed realistic given her obvious resources and organizational skills. What concerned Marcus was the independence she'd demonstrated throughout their conversation. Emma Whitmore clearly had no intention of seeking his approval or guidance for any aspect of her Harbor Falls venture. Walking back toward his office, Marcus found himself replaying their conversation and analyzing every nuance of Emma's responses to his questions. There had been something electric about their interaction, a sense of two strong personalities taking each other's measure and finding the encounter both challenging and stimulating. For the first time in years, Marcus had met someone who seemed completely unimpressed by his reputation and influence. Emma Whitmore had treated him with polite respect, but there had been no deference in her manner, no suggestion that she viewed him as anything more than another local business owner whose opinions might be worth considering. The experience was both refreshing and deeply unsettling. Back in his office, Marcus found it impossible to concentrate on routine business matters. His mind kept returning to Emma's emerald green eyes and the confident way she dismissed his offer of guidance. There was something about her independence that both attracted and challenged him in ways he wasn't accustomed to experiencing. Sarah Martinez knocked on his door around noon, carrying lunch and a stack of messages that had accumulated during his absence. "How did the meeting with the new inn owner go?" she asked, setting a sandwich and coffee on his desk. "Interesting," Marcus replied, though the word didn't begin to capture the complexity of his reaction to Emma Whitmore. "She's not what I expected." "Good different or bad different?" Sarah asked with the directness that made her such an effective assistant. Marcus considered the question carefully. Emma Whitmore represented change, unpredictability, and potential disruption to the ordered world he'd spent years creating. By every rational measure, her arrival in Harbor Falls should concern him. But there was something about her that transcended rational analysis, something that made him want to see her again, even as he recognized the complications her presence might create. "I'm not sure yet," Marcus admitted, "but I have a feeling Harbor Falls is about to become much more interesting." The following Monday arrived with an unseasonable warmth that had Harbor Falls buzzing with energy as moving trucks began arriving. At the Clearwater Inn before dawn, Marcus stood at his office window, coffee growing cold in his massive hands, watching the organized chaos of Emma Whitmore's relocation unfold across the harbor. Professional movers worked with military precision, unloading furniture and equipment that spoke of serious money and sophisticated taste. Emma herself appeared at 7 sharp, wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she moved among the workers with the easy authority of someone accustomed to managing complex operations. Marcus found himself studying her interactions with the moving crew, noting how she addressed each worker by name and seemed genuinely interested in their opinions about furniture placement and logistics. There was something mesmerizing about watching her work. She approached each decision with methodical precision, But there was an elegance to her movements that Marcus found oddly compelling. When she laughed at something one of the movers said, the sound carried across the harbor with a warmth that seemed to brighten the entire morning. Marcus realized he'd been standing at the window for nearly 30 minutes, completely absorbed in observing a woman he barely knew. The intensity of his interest was both surprising and somewhat disturbing. He prided himself on maintaining emotional distance from personal matters. Yet something about Emma Whitmore had captured his attention in ways that transcended mere professional curiosity. A knock at his door interrupted his surveillance. Tom Bradley entered with the morning shipping reports, his weathered face showing the concern that had become increasingly common over the past week. "Boss, we need to talk about the Patterson maritime contract. They're asking for rate reductions that would cut our profit margins to almost nothing." Marcus reluctantly turned away from the window, though his attention remained partially focused on the activity at the Clearwater Inn. "What kind of reductions are they requesting?" 15% across the board on all Northeast cargo runs," Tom replied, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "They claim the competition is offering better rates, but I've checked with our contacts at other shipping companies. Nobody's cutting prices that dramatically without losing money on every run." The news should have commanded Marcus's full attention, but he found himself glancing repeatedly toward the window where Emma Whitmore continued directing her moving operation with impressive efficiency. There was something about her presence in Harbor Falls that had disrupted his usual focus on business matters, though he couldn't quite identify what made her different from other attractive women who occasionally passed through town. "Have you identified which company Patterson is supposedly using for comparison?" Marcus asked, forcing himself to concentrate on the contract discussion. "That's the interesting part," Tom said, consulting his notes. "Patterson won't name the competing firm. Just keeps saying they've received better offers and expects us to match them. Sounds more like a fishing expedition than legitimate negotiation." Marcus nodded, though his mind was already working on more complex possibilities. Patterson Maritime was a mid-sized shipping operation based in Boston, large enough to handle significant cargo volumes, but small enough to be vulnerable to economic pressure from larger competitors. Their sudden demand for rate reductions could indicate genuine financial difficulties, but it might also suggest they were being influenced by outside interests with their own agenda. "Set up a meeting with Patterson's management for later this week," Marcus decided. Face-to-face negotiations work better than telephone discussions when dealing with unreasonable demands. "And Tom, I want you to do some discreet research into Patterson's recent business activities. Find out if they've taken on any new investors or changed their management structure recently." After Tom departed to handle the Patterson situation, Marcus returned to his window observation post. The moving trucks were nearly finished unloading, and Emma had shifted her attention to directing the placement of what appeared to be professional kitchen equipment. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that she was installing restaurant-grade appliances and work surfaces that suggested serious culinary ambitions. The scope of her renovation plans was becoming apparent, and Marcus found himself impressed. Despite his concerns about outside influence in Harbor Falls, Emma Whitmore wasn't just buying an existing business and making cosmetic improvements. She was creating something entirely new, transforming the tired old Clearwater Inn into what would probably become the finest dining establishment on the Maine coast. His contemplation was interrupted by Sarah Martinez, who entered with a concerned expression and a folded newspaper. "Mr. Kane, you need to see this morning's Portland Business Journal. There's an article about Harbor Falls that mentions both Kane Maritime and the new inn ownership." Marcus accepted the newspaper with growing unease. Articles about Harbor Falls in regional business publications were rare and usually indicated that something significant was happening that had attracted outside attention. He found the relevant piece on page 3, a brief but detailed analysis of recent property transactions and business developments in coastal Maine communities. The article identified Emma Whitmore as a former investment consultant who had specialized in hospitality industry acquisitions for a prestigious Manhattan firm before establishing her own boutique development company. Her track record included successful restaurant and hotel projects in Martha's Vineyard, the Hamptons, and several other upscale coastal destinations. The piece described her Harbor Falls investment as part of a broader trend toward sophisticated hospitality development in previously overlooked Maine communities. More concerning was the article's analysis of Harbor Falls' economic structure, which accurately identified Kane Maritime as the dominant local employer while suggesting that the town's dependence on a single industry made it vulnerable to economic disruption. The piece speculated that Emma Whitmore's arrival might signal the beginning of economic diversification that could reduce the community's reliance on shipping operations. Marcus set the newspaper aside with growing irritation. The article made it sound as though Harbor Falls needed saving from some kind of economic stagnation, when in reality the town had prospered under his leadership for over a decade. The suggestion that Emma Whitmore represented progress while his shipping operations represented the past struck him as both inaccurate and insulting. "Sarah, I want you to research Emma Whitmore's previous business ventures," Marcus said, his voice carrying the edge that his assistant had learned to recognize as a sign of serious concern. "Find out everything you can about her investment company, her financing sources, and her long-term development strategies. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Sarah nodded and departed to begin her research, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his growing unease about the implications of Emma Whitmore's presence in Harbor Falls. The newspaper article had confirmed his suspicions that she represented more than just a new business owner. She was part of a larger trend toward gentrification and development that could fundamentally alter the character of his community. By noon, Marcus had made a decision that surprised him with its impulsiveness. Instead of continuing to observe Emma's activities from a distance, he would introduce himself properly and attempt to understand her intentions directly. The rational approach was to establish a working relationship that protected his interests while accommodating her business goals. The fact that he found her personally fascinating was irrelevant to the practical necessity of managing potential conflicts before they became serious problems. Marcus left his office and walked across the harbor district toward the Clearwater Inn, noting how Emma's presence had already begun attracting attention from local residents. Small groups of people had gathered on the sidewalks to observe the renovation activities, their conversations buzzing with speculation about what the changes might mean for Harbor Falls. Some seemed excited about the prospect of an upscale restaurant, while others expressed concern about rising property values and changing community dynamics. The inn's front door stood open, revealing a scene of controlled chaos as workers installed new flooring while electricians updated the building's wiring to accommodate modern kitchen equipment. Emma stood in the center of it all, wearing work boots and holding architectural plans, while coordinating multiple projects simultaneously. Her ability to manage complex operations was immediately apparent, and Marcus found himself impressed despite his reservations about her presence in Harbor Falls. "Mr. Kane," Emma said, noticing his arrival with what might have been surprise or pleasure. "I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. Are you here in an official capacity or just curious about the renovation progress?" "Curious," Marcus admitted, though the answer was more complicated than he cared to explain. "Harbor Falls doesn't see this level of investment very often. I wanted to understand the scope of your plans." Emma smiled with the confidence of someone who'd fielded similar questions many times before. "Would you like the grand tour? I think you'll find the transformation quite impressive, though we're obviously still in the early stages." Marcus accepted her offer, following Emma through the inn's common areas while she explained her vision for each space. The main dining room would feature locally sourced seafood prepared with contemporary techniques, while a smaller private dining area would accommodate special events and business meetings. The guest rooms upstairs were being completely renovated with luxury amenities that would attract visitors from major metropolitan areas. The goal is to create a destination that showcases the best of Maine's coastal culture while providing amenities that meet contemporary expectations, Emma explained as they toured the kitchen installation. Harbor Falls has tremendous natural assets that haven't been fully developed from a hospitality perspective. Marcus listened to her presentation with growing appreciation for both her vision and her business acumen. Emma Whitmore had clearly researched Harbor Falls thoroughly before making her investment, identifying opportunities that local residents had either overlooked or lacked the resources to pursue. Her development plans were sophisticated without being pretentious, designed to enhance the community's existing character rather than replacing it with something artificial. But it was Emma herself who commanded Marcus's attention more than her renovation plans. She moved through the construction chaos with grace and authority, addressing workers' questions with knowledge that suggested hands-on experience with similar projects. When she spoke about her vision for the restaurant, her enthusiasm was infectious, painting pictures of culinary excellence that made Marcus want to experience the finished product immediately. "You've obviously done this before," Marcus observed, as they concluded the tour in what would become the inn's main bar area. "The level of planning and coordination suggests considerable experience with hospitality development." "I spent 8 years working for other people's visions before deciding to pursue my own," Emma replied, leaning against a newly installed granite countertop. Martha's Vineyard, the Hamptons, several properties in coastal Connecticut. Each project taught me something about balancing preservation with innovation. Marcus found himself studying her face as she spoke, noting the intelligence in her green eyes and the slight animation that appeared when she discussed her work. There was a passion beneath her professional demeanor that suggested Emma Whitmore was motivated by more than just financial returns. She seemed genuinely excited about the creative aspects of transforming spaces and communities. "What drew you specifically to Harbor Falls?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about her decision-making process. "There are dozens of coastal communities in Maine that might offer similar opportunities." Emma was quiet for a moment, gazing out the window toward the harbor where fishing boats were returning with their morning catches. "Harbor Falls has something most other places lack," she said finally. "Authenticity. It's a real working community with genuine character, not a sanitized tourist destination that's lost its soul to development pressure." The answer surprised Marcus with its sincerity. He'd expected Emma to cite economic factors or market opportunities, not emotional responses to community character. Her appreciation for Harbor Falls' authenticity suggested someone who understood the difference between development and destruction, between enhancement and replacement. "That authenticity can be fragile," Marcus said carefully. "Changes need to be implemented thoughtfully to avoid destroying the very qualities that make a place special." Emma turned to face him directly, her green eyes meeting his gray ones with unwavering attention. "Mr. Kane, are you concerned that my restaurant will somehow damage Harbor Falls' character? Or are you concerned that successful independent businesses might reduce the community's dependence on Kane Maritime?" The question was delivered without hostility, but its directness caught Marcus off guard. Emma Whitmore had identified the core of his concerns with uncomfortable accuracy, recognizing that his objections might be motivated more by self-interest than community welfare. "Both," Marcus admitted, deciding that honesty might be more effective than diplomatic evasion. "Harbor Falls has prospered under its current economic structure. Changes that disrupt that stability could have unintended consequences for everyone who depends on the community's success. Or changes that diversify the economic base could make the community stronger and more resilient," Emma countered. "Dependence on a single industry, no matter how successful, creates vulnerabilities that can devastate entire communities when circumstances change. The exchange had shifted from polite conversation to something approaching debate, though neither participant seemed interested in escalating the conflict. Marcus recognized that Emma was making valid points about economic diversification, while she seemed to understand his concerns about protecting existing prosperity. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion over dinner," Marcus suggested, surprising himself with the invitation. "I'd be interested in hearing more about your development philosophy, and you might benefit from learning more about Harbor Falls' economic history." Emma smiled with what might have been amusement or approval. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Kane, though I should mention that I generally prefer to keep business discussions separate from social activities." The polite deflection was delivered with enough charm to soften its impact, but Marcus recognized it as another assertion of independence. Emma Whitmore was making it clear that their relationship would be conducted on her terms, not his. The realization was both frustrating and oddly attractive. "Of course," Marcus replied, maintaining his diplomatic facade. "I wouldn't want to blur professional boundaries. Perhaps we could schedule a formal business meeting to discuss how our operations might complement each other." "I'd welcome that conversation," Emma said, though her tone suggested she saw little need for coordination between their respective businesses. "I'm sure we can find ways to coexist productively in Harbor Falls." The conversation continued for several more minutes, covering topics like construction timelines, local supplier relationships, and staffing requirements. But Marcus found himself paying more attention to Emma's mannerisms than her words, noting the way she gestured with her hands when making important points, the slight tilt of her head when considering questions, and the occasional smile that seemed to illuminate her entire face. There was something about Emma Whitmore that demanded attention in ways Marcus couldn't fully explain. She wasn't trying to impress him or win his approval, which made her all the more compelling. Her confidence was natural rather than performed, based on genuine competence rather than artificial bravado. By the time Marcus left the Clearwater Inn, he'd learned that Emma planned to soft open the restaurant in 6 weeks and hold a grand opening celebration that would showcase Harbor Falls to food critics and travel writers from throughout New England. Her marketing strategy was sophisticated and ambitious, designed to establish the inn as a regional destination while serving local customers' needs for special occasion dining. Walking back toward his office, Marcus found himself replaying their conversation and analyzing every nuance of Emma's responses to his questions. There had been something electric about their interaction, a sense of two strong personalities, taking each other's measure and finding the encounter both challenging and stimulating. For the first time in years, Marcus had met someone who seemed completely unimpressed by his reputation and influence. Emma Whitmore had treated him with polite respect, but there had been no deference in her manner, no suggestion that she viewed him as anything more than another local business owner whose opinions might be worth considering. The experience was both refreshing and deeply unsettling. Marcus was accustomed to being the dominant personality in any room, the person whose approval others sought and whose displeasure they avoided. Emma's independence challenged that dynamic in ways that forced him to reconsider his own assumptions about power and influence. Back in his office, Marcus found it impossible to concentrate on routine business matters. His mind kept returning to Emma's emerald green eyes and the confident way she'd questioned his motivations for opposing her presence in Harbor Falls. There was something about her directness that both attracted and challenged him in ways he wasn't accustomed to experiencing. Sarah Martinez returned with her research on Emma Whitmore's background, carrying a thick folder of information gathered from business publications and industry databases. "She's even more impressive than the newspaper article suggested," Sarah announced, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "Emma Whitmore has a track record of successful projects that have revitalized coastal communities without destroying their essential character." Marcus accepted the folder with mixed feelings. Part of him wanted to find evidence that Emma represented a threat to Harbor Falls' stability, while another part hoped to discover reasons why her presence might benefit the community. The research Sarah had compiled painted a picture of someone who approached development projects with both business acumen and genuine respect for local culture. Her financing appears to be entirely personal, Sarah continued. No corporate investors, no bank partnerships, no outside pressure for quick returns on investment. She's using her own money to pursue her own vision, which gives her complete control over project development and timelines. The information should have been reassuring, but Marcus found it oddly troubling instead. Emma Whitmore's financial independence meant she couldn't be influenced through traditional business pressure or partnership opportunities. She was accountable to no one but herself, free to pursue whatever goals she deemed appropriate, regardless of their impact on existing local interests. What about her personal background? Marcus asked, though he wasn't entirely sure why Emma's private life seemed relevant to his business concerns. Family connections, social relationships, long-term plans? Sarah consulted her notes with the thorough efficiency that made her such an effective research assistant. Unmarried, no children, parents deceased. She sold her Manhattan consulting firm 2 years ago and has been pursuing independent development projects ever since. No serious romantic relationships that show up in society pages or business profiles. Marcus absorbed this information with an interest that went beyond mere professional curiosity. Emma Whitmore was essentially alone in the world, accountable to no one, free to make decisions based entirely on her own judgment and preferences. The combination of independence and resources made her a formidable force that couldn't be easily predicted or controlled. Has she expressed any interest in expanding beyond the Clearwater Inn project? Marcus asked. Other property acquisitions, additional business ventures, long-term development plans for Harbor Falls? Nothing specific, Sarah replied, but her track record suggests she typically starts with one anchor property and then develops complementary businesses over time. Martha's Vineyard began with a single restaurant renovation and eventually included 3 properties and a catering operation. The implication was clear. Emma Whitmore's arrival in Harbor Falls might represent the beginning of a much larger transformation rather than a single business venture. Her success with the Clearwater Inn could attract other outside investors and developers, potentially leading to the kind of rapid gentrification that had altered the character of countless coastal communities. Marcus thanked Sarah for her research and spent the remainder of the afternoon reviewing the information she'd compiled. Emma Whitmore's professional accomplishments were undeniably impressive. Her business judgment appeared sound, and her development philosophy seemed respectful of local character and culture. By every rational measure, her presence in Harbor Falls should be welcomed as an opportunity for positive growth and economic diversification. But rationality didn't explain the possessive instincts that Emma's independence had triggered in Marcus. There was something about her self-sufficiency that challenged his fundamental assumptions about how relationships and communities should function. She didn't need his approval, his guidance, or his protection. She didn't seem particularly interested in his opinions or concerned about his reactions to her plans. For a man who'd spent his adult life being essential to everyone around him, Emma Whitmore's complete autonomy was both fascinating and deeply disturbing. She represented a kind of freedom that Marcus had never experienced himself, the ability to pursue personal vision without consideration for others' expectations or approval. As evening approached and Harbor Falls settled into its quiet evening rhythms, Marcus stood once again at his office window, watching lights appear in the Clearwater Inn's windows. Emma was obviously working late, probably finalizing renovation plans or coordinating with contractors and suppliers. Her dedication was evident even from a distance, and Marcus found himself wondering what drove someone to work so hard for goals that benefited no one but themselves. The question led to uncomfortable self-reflection about his own motivations and methods. Marcus had built Kane Maritime through relentless effort and careful control of every variable that might affect his success. But his efforts had always been directed toward creating security and stability, protecting himself and his community from the kind of chaos and uncertainty that had characterized his childhood. Emma Whitmore seemed motivated by different goals entirely. She appeared to seek challenge and creativity rather than security, pursuing projects that enhanced and transformed rather than simply controlling and preserving. Her willingness to risk substantial personal resources on uncertain ventures suggested either remarkable confidence or dangerous recklessness. Marcus realized he needed to understand Emma Whitmore better before he could determine whether she represented an opportunity or a threat to the life he'd built in Harbor Falls. Her independence made traditional business negotiations impossible, while her competence made dismissing her concerns unwise. She was unlike anyone he'd encountered before, and dealing with her would require strategies he'd never needed to develop. The challenge both excited and troubled him in ways he wasn't prepared to acknowledge. Emma Whitmore had disrupted his carefully ordered world simply by existing in it, and Marcus suspected that his life in Harbor Falls would never be quite the same again. Tomorrow would bring new complications as Emma's renovation work continued, and her presence in the community became increasingly visible. But tonight, Marcus stood at his window watching her lights burn late into the evening, wondering what it would be like to know someone who lived with such fearless independence. The answer to that question would change everything he thought. He understood about power, control, and the dangerous territory of the human heart. 3 weeks after Emma Whitmore's arrival in Harbor Falls, Marcus Kane found himself standing outside the Clearwater Inn at 7 in the morning, holding a bouquet of locally grown flowers and questioning every decision that had led him to this moment. The autumn air carried the scent of salt and changing leaves as he watched smoke rise from the inn's chimney, evidence that Emma was already awake and working despite the early hour. He'd spent the previous evening pacing his waterfront home, wrestling with emotions he couldn't name and impulses he didn't understand. Emma Whitmore had become a constant presence in his thoughts, disrupting his focus during business meetings and drawing his attention whenever he glimpsed her auburn hair through the inn's windows. The intensity of his interest was both unprecedented and deeply troubling for a man who prided himself on maintaining control over every aspect of his life. The flowers had been an impulse purchase from Davidson's Market, justified by the thin excuse of welcoming a new business owner to the community. Marcus knew the gesture was more personal than professional, but he couldn't seem to stop himself from seeking reasons to interact with Emma, despite her obvious disinterest in developing any kind of relationship beyond polite neighborly coexistence. The inn's front door opened before Marcus could knock, revealing Emma dressed in paint-splattered jeans and an oversized sweater that somehow managed to make her look both approachable and impossibly elegant. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun secured with what appeared to be a pencil, and there was a smudge of white paint on her left cheek that Marcus found oddly endearing. "Mr. Kane," Emma said, her surprise evident as she noticed both him and the flowers he carried. "This is unexpected. Are those for me, or are you perhaps delivering them to someone else in the building?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized how his early morning appearance might be interpreted. "They're for you," he admitted, extending the bouquet with less confidence than he typically displayed in any situation. "I wanted to welcome you properly to Harbor Falls, local tradition for new business owners." Emma accepted the flowers with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased despite her obvious skepticism about local traditions that Marcus had clearly invented on the spot. "That's very thoughtful of you. Would you like to come in for coffee? I was just taking a break from painting the main dining room, and I could use the company." The invitation surprised Marcus, who'd expected polite thanks followed by a diplomatic dismissal. Emma's willingness to extend their interaction beyond the flower exchange suggested either genuine friendliness or curiosity about his motivations for appearing at her door, with romantic gestures disguised as community welcome protocols. Inside the inn, the transformation was even more impressive than Marcus had anticipated during his previous visits. The main floor had been completely renovated with hardwood floors that gleamed under carefully positioned lighting, while the walls featured a sophisticated color scheme that managed to feel both elegant and welcoming. The space retained its historic character while incorporating modern amenities that would appeal to sophisticated travelers. "This is remarkable," Marcus said, following Emma toward the kitchen area where professional-grade equipment had been installed with obvious attention to both functionality and aesthetic appeal. "You've managed to modernize everything while preserving the building's original charm." Emma poured coffee into two mismatched mugs that somehow seemed perfect for the casual intimacy of their early morning conversation. "Thank you. I believe in honoring a building's history while adapting it for contemporary needs. The Clearwater Inn has hosted travelers for over a century. I want to continue that tradition with updated expectations for comfort and cuisine." Marcus accepted the offered coffee, noting that Emma had remembered his preference for black coffee from their previous brief encounters. The attention to detail suggested someone who noticed and retained information about people she met, even when those interactions were primarily professional in nature. "How much longer before you're ready to open?" Marcus asked, settling into a chair at the kitchen island while Emma perched on a stool across from him. The casual arrangement felt surprisingly intimate, despite the professional nature of their conversation. 6 weeks if everything goes according to schedule," Emma replied, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug in a gesture that Marcus found oddly compelling. "The dining room renovation should be finished next week, followed by final equipment installation and staff training. I'm hoping to soft open with a limited menu before the full grand opening celebration." Marcus found himself studying Emma's face as she spoke, noting the enthusiasm that appeared whenever she discussed her work. Her green eyes seemed to sparkle with excitement about the creative challenges of restaurant development, and her gestures became more animated as she described her vision for Harbor Falls' first upscale dining establishment. "Have you given thought to staffing?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about her plans for integrating into the local community. Harbor Falls doesn't have a large pool of experienced restaurant workers, particularly for the level of service you're obviously planning to provide. Emma smiled with the confidence of someone who'd already solved potential problems before they became actual obstacles. "I'll be bringing my head chef and sommelier from my previous project, but I want to hire locally for most positions. There's tremendous talent in this community that just needs proper training and opportunity." The comment revealed something important about Emma's approach to business development. Rather than importing everything from outside sources, she intended to invest in local people and skills. The strategy would create employment opportunities while building community support for her venture. "That's an enlightened approach," Marcus observed. "Too many outside investors treat local communities as sources of cheap labor rather than partners in development. Business is always more successful when it benefits everyone involved," Emma replied, meeting his eyes with directness. That made Marcus feel as though she could see straight through any pretense or hidden agenda. "I learned early in my career that sustainable growth requires genuine community investment, not just financial capital." The conversation continued for over an hour as Emma shared details about her renovation plans while Marcus found himself revealing more about Harbor Falls' history and character than he'd intended. There was something about Emma's attentive listening that drew out information and opinions he rarely shared with anyone, even close business associates. When Marcus finally departed the inn, he carried with him Emma's phone number and a tentative agreement to provide recommendations for local suppliers and service providers. The interaction had felt more like a friendly consultation between equals than the formal business meeting he'd originally envisioned. Walking back toward his office, Marcus realized that his feelings about Emma Whitmore had evolved beyond mere attraction or professional concern. There was something about her combination of intelligence, independence, and genuine warmth that appealed to him in ways he'd never experienced before. She challenged his assumptions about relationships and power while treating him with respect. That felt earned rather than automatic. The recognition that he was developing genuine romantic feelings for Emma Whitmore was both exhilarating and deeply troubling. Marcus had spent years avoiding emotional entanglements that might compromise his focus on business success or create vulnerabilities that others could exploit. Emma represented exactly the kind of complication he'd taught himself to avoid. But avoidance was proving impossible when every glimpse of Emma's auburn hair through the inn's windows sent his pulse racing, and every conversation left him counting hours until he might reasonably find another excuse to see her again. For the first time since adolescence, Marcus Kane was experiencing emotions that seemed beyond his ability to control or direct. The situation was further complicated by Emma's obvious disinterest in anything beyond friendly professional cooperation. She treated Marcus with warmth and respect, but there was no indication that she viewed him as anything more than a local business owner whose advice might occasionally prove useful. Her independence extended to romantic relationships as thoroughly as it governed her business decisions. Over the following days, Marcus found himself creating opportunities to visit the inn under various pretexts. He recommended suppliers for Emma's renovation projects, provided contacts for local service providers, and offered insights about Harbor Falls' seasonal tourism patterns. Each interaction strengthened his attraction, while confirming that Emma viewed their relationship in purely professional terms. The frustration of unrequited interest was entirely new for Marcus, who'd grown accustomed to romantic situations where his success and commanding presence made him the pursued rather than the pursuer. Emma's indifference to his wealth and influence forced him to consider what he might offer beyond material advantages and social status. The question led to uncomfortable self-reflection about the kind of man he'd become during his single-minded pursuit of business success. Marcus realized he'd spent so many years focused on accumulating power and controlling circumstances that he'd never developed the emotional skills necessary for equal partnerships with independent individuals. Emma Whitmore represented everything Marcus had never known he wanted in a woman. Her intelligence matched his own, her confidence didn't require external validation, and her success was self-created rather than inherited or granted by others. She was beautiful without being vain, accomplished without being arrogant, and independent without being cold or calculating. But her very perfection made her seem impossibly out of reach for someone whose primary romantic skills involved leveraging business relationships and social advantages rather than genuine emotional connection. Marcus found himself questioning whether he was capable of the kind of authentic intimacy that someone like Emma would require from a romantic partner. The internal struggle between desire and self-doubt reached a crisis point during Harbor Falls' monthly Chamber of Commerce meeting, where Emma had been invited to present her renovation plans to local business owners. Marcus arrived early, ostensibly to review shipping reports, but actually hoping to secure a seat where he could observe Emma's presentation without appearing overly interested. The meeting was held in the community center's main hall, a space that typically hosted town council sessions and holiday celebrations. Local business owners filled the available chairs while Marcus positioned himself along the back wall where his height allowed him to see over the crowd while remaining relatively inconspicuous. Emma entered the hall wearing a navy blue dress that managed to look both professional and feminine. Her auburn hair styled in a sophisticated updo that emphasized her graceful neck and the elegant line of her shoulders. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to addressing skeptical audiences and winning them over through competence rather than charm. "Good evening," Emma began, her clear voice carrying easily to every corner of the crowded hall. "I'm Emma Whitmore, And I'm excited to share my vision for the Clearwater Inn's transformation into Harbor Falls' premier dining destination. Marcus found himself mesmerized by Emma's presentation skills as she outlined her renovation plans with professional slides and detailed financial projections. She addressed potential concerns about property values, traffic patterns, and employment opportunities with data-driven responses that demonstrated thorough research and realistic expectations. But it was Emma's passion for her project that truly commanded the room's attention. When she spoke about showcasing local seafood and ingredients, her enthusiasm was infectious. When she described her commitment to hiring local staff and supporting regional suppliers, her sincerity was evident. She wasn't just opening a business. She was investing in a community she genuinely cared about. The Clearwater Inn will serve as an ambassador for Harbor Falls, Emma concluded, her green eyes sparkling with excitement about possibilities that extended far beyond her individual success. When food critics and travel writers visit our restaurant, they'll discover a community worth celebrating and supporting. The presentation concluded with enthusiastic applause and numerous questions about timeline, employment opportunities, and potential community benefits. Emma handled each inquiry with grace and detailed knowledge, demonstrating preparation that impressed even the most skeptical audience members. Marcus remained along the back wall as the meeting dissolved into smaller conversations, watching Emma field individual questions from business owners, who were clearly excited about her project's potential impact on local tourism and economic development. Her ability to connect with people from all walks of life was remarkable, adapting her communication style to match each person's interests and concerns. "Impressive presentation," Marcus said when Emma finally approached his position along the wall, most other attendees having departed for their evening routines. "Thank you," Emma replied, her smile suggesting genuine pleasure at his approval. "I was nervous about addressing the local business community. Success depends on community support, and I wanted to ensure everyone understood my commitment to being a positive addition to Harbor Falls." Marcus found himself studying Emma's face in the community center's harsh fluorescent lighting, noting the slight fatigue around her eyes that suggested she'd been working too hard and sleeping too little. Her dedication to her project was admirable, but Marcus worried that she was pushing herself beyond reasonable limits in pursuit of perfectionist standards. "Would you join me for dinner?" Marcus asked, the invitation emerging before he could consider its implications or potential consequences. "There's a small seafood place near the harbor that serves excellent local catch. Nothing fancy, but the food is authentic and the atmosphere is relaxed." Emma hesitated for a moment, and Marcus prepared himself for polite refusal accompanied by diplomatic excuses about busy schedules and professional boundaries. But instead, she smiled with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at his suggestion. "I'd like that," Emma said, her acceptance surprising Marcus with its simplicity and apparent sincerity. "I've been so focused on renovation work that I haven't had time to explore Harbor Falls' existing dining options. Local research is essential for understanding the market I'll be serving." The rational justification for accepting his invitation should have disappointed Marcus, but he found himself pleased that Emma had found a way to say yes regardless of her underlying motivations. Spending an evening with her would provide opportunities to learn more about her background and interests while demonstrating that he could offer companionship beyond business consultation and local networking. Cooper's Catch occupied a converted fish house at the end of Harbor Falls' main pier, its weathered exterior and casual atmosphere providing a stark contrast to the sophisticated establishment Emma was creating at the Clearwater Inn. The restaurant's charm lay in its authenticity rather than its ambiance, serving fresh seafood prepared simply and presented without pretense. Marcus had chosen Cooper's deliberately, hoping to show Emma a side of Harbor Falls that emphasized substance over style, community character over commercial polish. If she truly appreciated authenticity, as she'd claimed during their earlier conversations, then Cooper's catch would provide an excellent test of her sincerity. Emma's reaction to the restaurant's unpretentious atmosphere exceeded Marcus's expectations. She seemed genuinely delighted by the nautical memorabilia covering the walls and the view of working fishing boats visible through salt-stained windows. Her enthusiasm appeared authentic rather than performed, suggesting appreciation for character that couldn't be manufactured or purchased. "This is exactly what I hoped to find," Emma said, settling into a wooden booth that had obviously served countless fishermen and harbor workers over several decades. Genuine local flavor that grows naturally from community culture rather than being imposed by outside developers. Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction at Emma's response, confirming his instinct that she would value substance over superficial sophistication. Her appreciation for Cooper's catch suggested compatibility that went beyond professional interests or mutual physical attraction. The conversation that followed revealed layers of Emma's personality that Marcus hadn't glimpsed during their previous business-focused interactions. She spoke about her childhood summers spent with grandparents who owned a small inn in coastal Rhode Island, experiences that had sparked her interest in hospitality industry development. She described her decision to leave Manhattan's consulting world, motivated by desire for creative autonomy rather than simply financial success. "I spent 8 years making other people's visions profitable," Emma explained, her voice carrying subtle frustration about past professional limitations. "Success felt hollow when it didn't reflect my own values or interests. The money was excellent, but I realized I was trading my creativity for security I didn't actually need." Marcus found himself sharing details about his own background that he rarely discussed with anyone. He spoke about his father's abandonment and his mother's struggles, experiences that had shaped his determination to create security through business success and community control. He described the satisfaction of building Kane Maritime from nothing, but also acknowledged the isolation that came with being responsible for so many people's livelihoods. "Power can become a burden when you realize how many people depend on your decisions," Marcus admitted, surprised by his willingness to reveal vulnerability to someone he was still trying to impress. "Success creates obligations that limit freedom in ways I didn't anticipate when I was building the company." Emma listened with attention, felt both respectful and understanding, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated genuine interest in his perspective rather than polite social engagement. Her responses revealed someone who'd grappled with similar questions about responsibility, autonomy, and the unexpected costs of individual achievement. The evening stretched longer than either had initially planned as their conversation ranged from business philosophy to personal values, childhood experiences to future aspirations. Marcus discovered that Emma shared his appreciation for classical music and historical biography, while she learned about his passion for sailing and his secret interest in watercolor painting. By the time they left Cooper's catch, Marcus felt as though he'd glimpsed the real Emma Whitmore beneath her professional competence and confident independence. She was more complex and interesting than he'd imagined, combining ambition with empathy, intelligence with emotional depth, strength with surprising vulnerability. Walking Emma back to the Clearwater Inn through Harbor Falls' quiet evening streets, Marcus found himself hoping their relationship might evolve beyond professional cooperation and occasional social encounters. Emma's company had reminded him of possibilities he'd forgotten during his years of single-minded focus on business success and community control. "Thank you for dinner," Emma said as they reached the inn's front entrance, her smile carrying warmth that seemed to extend beyond mere politeness. "I enjoyed learning more about Harbor Falls from someone who truly understands its character and history." Marcus felt encouraged by her positive response to their evening together, though he remained uncertain about how to proceed without seeming presumptuous or overwhelming. Emma's independence made traditional romantic gestures seem inappropriate, while her intelligence required approaches based on genuine compatibility rather than superficial charm. Perhaps we could do this again, Marcus suggested carefully, unwilling to assume that one pleasant evening indicated interest in developing a deeper relationship. I'd be happy to show you more of the area, or simply continue our conversation about business philosophy and community development. Emma's expression suggested consideration rather than automatic acceptance or polite refusal. I'd like that, she said finally, her response seeming both genuine and measured. Though I should warn you that my schedule will be quite demanding as the opening approaches. Between renovation oversight and staff training, I'll have limited availability for social activities. The qualification was realistic rather than discouraging, acknowledging practical constraints without rejecting future possibilities. Marcus appreciated Emma's directness about her priorities while finding hope in her willingness to make time for their developing friendship despite professional pressures. As Marcus walked home through Harbor Falls' empty streets, he reflected on the evening's revelations about both Emma and himself. She was even more remarkable than he'd initially recognized, combining professional competence with personal depth that made her friendship valuable regardless of romantic possibilities. But Marcus also recognized that his feelings had evolved beyond mere attraction into something approaching genuine affection for Emma as an individual rather than simply as an object of desire. The realization brought both excitement and anxiety about the implications of pursuing a relationship with someone whose independence and confidence challenged every assumption he'd developed about romantic dynamics. Emma Whitmore would never be content to be possessed or controlled, would never accept a subordinate role in any partnership, would never surrender her autonomy for security or convenience. For a man who'd built his adult life around maintaining control over every important variable, the prospect of loving someone he couldn't predict or direct was both terrifying and intensely appealing. Emma represented the possibility of genuine partnership with an equal, the kind of relationship Marcus had never imagined possible for someone with his personality and background. But achieving that kind of relationship would require Marcus to become someone different from the man he'd been for the past decade. He would need to learn how to share power rather than simply exercising it, how to support another person's dreams rather than expecting others to support his own, how to be vulnerable enough for genuine intimacy while remaining strong enough to be worthy of someone like Emma Whitmore. The challenge was daunting, but as Marcus reached his waterfront home and looked back toward the Clearwater Inn's glowing windows, he realized that Emma was worth whatever changes might be necessary. For the first time in his adult life, he'd met someone who made him want to be better than he was, someone whose respect and affection seemed more valuable than all the business success and community influence he'd accumulated over the years. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to demonstrate that he was capable of the kind of equal partnership that Emma would require from any romantic relationship. Marcus fell asleep that night, planning ways to support her business success while proving that his interest in her extended far beyond mere physical attraction or the challenge of pursuing someone who seemed unattainable. The transformation had begun, though Marcus didn't yet fully understand how completely Emma Whitmore would change everything he thought he knew about love, power, and the dangerous territory of the human heart. The storm arrived on a Thursday morning with the fury of nature unleashed, battering Harbor Falls with winds that bent century-old oak trees and waves that crashed over the main pier with devastating force. Marcus stood in his office watching the tempest through rain-lashed windows, but the weather wasn't what had his jaw clenched and his massive hands curled into fists. The real storm had started 3 hours earlier with a phone call that shattered the fragile peace he'd begun to build with Emma Whitmore. Atlantic Hospitality Group had made an offer to purchase the Clearwater Inn for 3 times what Emma had paid, contingent on her agreement to relocate their corporate restaurant concept to Harbor Falls within 60 days. The offer came with implicit threats about zoning challenges and permit difficulties that could plague independent operators who who refused to cooperate with established industry networks. Marcus had learned about the hostile takeover attempt from Tom Bradley, whose wife worked in the county planning office and had overheard conversations between Atlantic's lawyers and local officials. The timing wasn't coincidental. Atlantic had waited until Emma's renovation was nearly complete before making their move, maximizing the financial pressure while minimizing her ability to resist through delay tactics. They're not just targeting Emma, Tom had explained during his grim morning briefing. Atlantic wants to establish a beachhead in Maine's coastal hospitality market. Harbor Falls is perfect for their expansion strategy because we don't have existing chain operations to compete with their corporate model. The implications extended far beyond Emma's individual business. If Atlantic succeeded in forcing her out, they would likely target other independent establishments throughout the region, systematically replacing local character with standardized corporate efficiency. Harbor Falls could become another homogenized tourist destination where authentic culture was replaced by market-tested entertainment, designed to extract maximum revenue from visiting consumers. But Marcus's rage wasn't primarily motivated by concerns about community preservation or economic development. His fury was personal, possessive, and directed toward anyone who dared to threaten something he'd begun to consider his own. Emma. Whitmore might not return his romantic feelings, but she belonged in Harbor Falls, belonged in his world, belonged where he could see her auburn hair catching morning sunlight through the inn's windows. The realization that his feelings had evolved into territorial possessiveness should have troubled Marcus, but the storm of emotion raging through his chest left no room for rational self-analysis. Someone was trying to take Emma away from him, and every primitive instinct he possessed demanded immediate and overwhelming retaliation against the threat. Marcus left his office without explanation, driving through the hurricane-force winds toward the Clearwater, in with single-minded determination to reach Emma before Atlantic's representatives could present their ultimatum in person. The roads were treacherous with fallen branches and flooding, but Marcus navigated the obstacles with the focused intensity of someone whose world had suddenly contracted to a single urgent priority. He found Emma in the inn's main dining room, standing amid the elegant furnishings she'd spent weeks selecting and arranging with meticulous care. Her auburn hair was disheveled, and her green eyes showed the strain of someone who'd received devastating news and was still processing its implications. She held Atlantic's written offer in hands that trembled slightly despite her obvious efforts to maintain composure. "Emma," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying across the dining room with an authority that made her look up immediately. "Tom Bradley told me about Atlantic's offer. I came as soon as I heard." Emma's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching relief at his arrival, though she quickly composed herself with the professional demeanor that had become her default response to crisis situations. "Mr. Kane, I appreciate your concern, but this is a business matter that I need to handle independently." The formal address stunned Marcus more than he'd expected, representing a retreat from the growing intimacy they'd developed over recent weeks of shared dinners and late-evening conversations. Emma was withdrawing behind professional boundaries, asserting her independence at exactly the moment when Marcus wanted to offer protection and support. "Emma, you don't have to face this alone," Marcus said, moving closer despite her obvious desire to maintain distance. "Atlantic Hospitality Group has a reputation for using legal pressure and political influence to force out independent operators. They're not just making a business proposal. They're declaring war on everything you've built here." Emma set Atlantic's offer on a nearby table with deliberate care, her movements suggesting someone fighting to maintain control over emotions that threaten to overwhelm rational decision-making. "I understand the implications, Marcus, but accepting help from you would compromise the independence that attracted me to Harbor Falls in the first place." The use of his first name provided a small comfort even as her words reinforced the barrier she was attempting to maintain between them. Marcus recognized that Emma was struggling with pride as much as practical concerns, unwilling to accept assistance that might create obligations or dependencies she couldn't control. "This isn't about independence," Marcus replied, his voice carrying an edge of frustration that he couldn't entirely suppress. "This is about survival. Atlantic has resources and connections that individual operators can't match. Fighting them alone isn't brave, it's suicide." Emma's green eyes flashed with anger at his assessment, her professional composure cracking to reveal the fierce determination that had driven her success in previous ventures. "I've faced corporate pressure before, Marcus. I didn't come to Harbor Falls to hide behind someone else's protection. I came here to build something on my own terms." The argument that followed revealed fundamental differences in their approaches to conflict and problem-solving. Marcus advocated for coordinated resistance using his political connections and economic influence to pressure Atlantic into withdrawing their hostile offer. Emma insisted on handling the situation through legal channels and direct negotiation, refusing to accept help that might compromise her autonomy or create obligations to local power structures. "You're being stubborn to the point of self-destruction," Marcus said, his voice rising with frustration as Emma rejected each suggestion for collaborative resistance. "Your independence won't matter if Atlantic forces you out of business and destroys everything you've worked to create. And your protection won't matter if it turns me into someone who can't survive without constant assistance from powerful men," Emma shot back, her composure finally shattering to reveal the passion and vulnerability beneath her professional facade. "I've seen what happens to women who trade autonomy for security. They lose themselves piece by piece until there's nothing left but dependence and gratitude." The revelation that Emma's resistance was based on deeper fears about feminine autonomy and masculine control provided crucial insight into her motivations, but it also triggered Marcus's own defensive responses about being categorized with men who used protection as a method of establishing dominance over independent women. "I'm not trying to control you," Marcus protested, though even as he spoke the words he recognized their inadequacy. His desire to protect Emma was inextricably linked with possessive instincts that went beyond rational concern for her welfare. "I'm trying to help someone I care about survive a threat that's bigger than anything one person can handle alone." Emma's expression softened slightly at his admission of personal feelings, but her resolve remained unchanged. "I know you care, Marcus, but caring doesn't give you the right to make decisions for me, even when those decisions might be objectively better than the choices I'm making for myself." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two men in expensive suits, who entered the dining room with the confident authority of people accustomed to getting their way through legal pressure and financial intimidation. Marcus recognized the type immediately: corporate lawyers who specialized in acquisition tactics that skirted the edge of legality while maintaining plausible deniability about their more questionable methods. "Miss Whitmore," the older man said, extending a business card with practiced smoothness. "James Morrison from Atlantic Hospitality Group. This is my associate, David Chun. We're here to discuss the proposal we submitted this morning and answer any questions you might have about our offer." Marcus felt his jaw clench as Morrison's gaze moved dismissively over him before focusing entirely on Emma with the predatory attention of someone evaluating vulnerable prey. The lawyer's body language suggested complete confidence in his ability to pressure Emma into accepting Atlantic's terms, regardless of her initial resistance. "Gentlemen," Emma replied with icy politeness, "I appreciate your prompt follow-up, but I haven't had sufficient time to review your proposal thoroughly. Any discussion would be premature at this point." Morrison smiled with the practiced charm of someone who'd conducted hundreds of similar negotiations. "Miss Whitmore, our offer is quite generous and time-sensitive. The hospitality industry moves quickly, and opportunities like this don't remain available indefinitely." The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. Atlantic was creating artificial urgency to prevent Emma from consulting with lawyers or developing alternative strategies for maintaining her independence. Morrison's approach was textbook corporate intimidation, designed to pressure quick decisions that favored the acquiring company. Marcus stepped forward with his full imposing height, his presence immediately changing the dynamic in the dining room as Morrison and Chun were forced to acknowledge someone whose local influence and physical authority couldn't be dismissed as easily as a single independent business owner. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying the quiet menace of someone accustomed to being taken seriously when he chose to assert his authority. "Miss Whitmore has indicated that she needs time to consider your proposal. I suggest you respect her request and arrange a follow-up meeting at her convenience." Morrison's expression shifted from predatory confidence to careful assessment as he recognized that Emma wasn't as isolated as Atlantic's research had suggested. The presence of a local power broker complicated their pressure tactics considerably, introducing variables that couldn't be controlled through standard corporate acquisition procedures. "Mr. Kane, isn't it?" Morrison said, consulting notes on his phone with the efficiency of someone who'd researched local political and economic structures before arriving in Harbor Falls. "We're not looking for conflict with established business interests. Our expansion into Maine's coastal market can benefit everyone involved." The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the underlying message. Atlantic was offering to work with Marcus rather than against him, providing economic incentives for his cooperation in pressuring Emma to accept their buyout offer. The approach revealed sophisticated understanding of local power dynamics and willingness to use those dynamics for corporate advantage. "What benefits are you offering?" Marcus asked, though his question was motivated by curiosity about Atlantic's strategy rather than genuine interest in their proposals. Shun opened a leather portfolio and pulled out documents that showed Atlantic's bigger development plans for the Harbor Falls area. The scope was huge, involving many property purchases, infrastructure improvements, and marketing campaigns designed to transform the small fishing community into a major tourist destination within 5 years. "Our preliminary investment commitment exceeds $50 million over 3 years. Chun explained with the enthusiasm of someone presenting amazing opportunities. "Employment would triple, property values would increase dramatically, and Harbor Falls would become one of Maine's top vacation destinations." Marcus studied the development plans with growing worry, recognizing that Atlantic's vision would completely change everything that made Harbor Falls worth preserving. The proposed changes would bring prosperity, but at the cost of community character and local independence that had taken generations to develop. "What role do you see for existing local businesses?" Marcus asked, though Emma's sharp look suggested she disapproved of his engaging with Atlantic's representatives at all. Morrison smiled with the confidence of someone who had answered similar questions many times before. "Successful local operators would have opportunities to participate in our expansion, either as employees or franchisees. We believe in working with community leaders rather than displacing them unnecessarily." The offer was both generous and insulting, providing economic security in exchange for independence and creative control. Marcus could see why the proposal might appeal to struggling business owners, but he also understood why someone like Emma would view it as cultural and economic colonization, disguised as partnership opportunity. "And if existing operators prefer to maintain their independence?" Emma asked, her voice carrying dangerous calm that Marcus had learned to recognize as a warning sign of barely controlled anger. Chun's expression became apologetic with practiced sincerity. "Unfortunately, market forces make independent operation increasingly difficult when major corporate players enter a territory. Regulatory compliance, insurance costs, and marketing expenses create barriers that individual operators often find impossible to overcome." The threat was delivered with bureaucratic language, but its meaning was clear. Atlantic would use their resources and connections to make independent operation economically impossible for businesses that refused to join their corporate network. Emma's choice was submission or slow financial destruction. Marcus felt rage building in his chest as he recognized the systematic approach Atlantic was using to destroy local independence while maintaining legal protection about their predatory tactics. They were not just targeting Emma's business. They were attacking the entire community structure that had made Harbor Falls worth protecting. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had made his final decision about an important matter. "I think this meeting is concluded. Miss Whitmore will contact you when she is ready to discuss your proposal further." Morrison's expression suggested disappointment, tempered by professional acceptance of temporary setbacks. "Of course, Miss Whitmore. We will expect to hear from you within 48 hours. After that, our offer terms may need to be reconsidered based on changing market conditions." After Atlantic's representatives departed, Emma and Marcus stood in the dining room surrounded by the elegant furnishings that represented months of careful planning and substantial financial investment. The silence between them carried the weight of unresolved conflicts about independence, protection, and the fundamental question of whether their developing relationship could survive external pressure and internal disagreements about how to face shared threats. "I suppose you think I should have accepted their offer," Emma said finally, her voice carrying exhaustion that went beyond mere physical fatigue. Marcus studied her face, noting the vulnerability beneath her determined independence and recognizing that his response would determine whether their relationship survived this crisis or fractured under pressure from forces neither of them could control alone. "I think you should do whatever allows you to sleep at night," Marcus replied carefully. "But I also think you should know that you do not have to make that decision in isolation. Some battles are worth fighting together, even when fighting together means risking the independence that brought you here in the first place." Emma's green eyes met his gray ones with an intensity that suggested she was evaluating not just his words, but his fundamental character and motivations. The moment stretched between them like a bridge across dangerous territory, offering connection, but requiring courage to cross. "Marcus," Emma said softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone making a decision that would change everything between them. "I do not know if I can trust you not to try to control this situation, but I know I cannot handle Atlantic alone. If you are serious about fighting together, then we fight as equals, or we do not fight at all." Marcus felt something shift in his chest as he recognized the magnitude of what Emma was offering. She was willing to risk her independence for their partnership, but only if he was willing to risk his need for control in return. The choice would define not just their business relationship, but the foundation of whatever personal connection might develop between them. "Equals," Marcus agreed, extending his hand with the solemnity of someone entering into a binding contract. "Whatever happens, we face it together on terms we both can live with." As Emma took his offered hand, Marcus realized that the real storm was just beginning. But for the first time since Atlantic's threat had emerged, he felt something approaching. Hope that they might weather it together. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the Clearwater Inn's front porch, watching the sun set over Harbor Falls with Emma beside him, her hand intertwined with his as they surveyed the community they had fought to preserve together. The battle against Atlantic Hospitality Group had ended 3 weeks earlier with a decisive victory that surprised everyone except Marcus, who had never doubted that Emma Whitmore could accomplish anything she set her mind to achieving. The legal challenge had required every ounce of strategic thinking and community mobilization that Marcus possessed, combined with Emma's sophisticated understanding of corporate law and hospitality industry regulations. Together, they had exposed Atlantic's predatory practices to state regulators, while building a coalition of local businesses and residents who refused to surrender their community's character to corporate homogenization. Emma's restaurant had opened to reviews that exceeded even her most optimistic expectations, with food critics from Boston and New York describing the Clearwater Inn as a perfect synthesis of coastal Maine authenticity and contemporary culinary excellence. Reservations were booked solid for the next 4 months, and Emma had already begun planning expansion that would include cooking classes and specialty food products showcasing local ingredients. But the real transformation had occurred in Marcus himself, who had discovered that sharing power with someone he loved was infinitely more satisfying than exercising control alone. Emma had challenged him to become a better man, a more generous partner, and a leader who empowered others rather than simply commanding them. "I have something to tell you," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying a nervousness that Emma had learned to associate with moments when he was about to reveal something important about his feelings or intentions. Emma turned to face him with the attention she always gave to his more serious pronouncements, her green eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun and the contentment that had replaced the stress and uncertainty of their early relationship. "What is it?" Emma asked, though her smile suggested she had already guessed what Marcus was preparing to share with her. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that contained a ring he had spent weeks selecting with meticulous care, wanting something that would reflect Emma's unique combination of elegance and independence, while symbolizing his commitment to partnership rather than possession. "Emma Claire Whitmore," Marcus said, dropping to one knee on the porch where they had shared so many conversations about business, community, and the future they wanted to build together. "I love your intelligence, your courage, your independence, and your remarkable ability to make everything around you better simply by being yourself." Emma's eyes filled with tears as Marcus opened the ring box to reveal a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds, a piece that managed to be both sophisticated and timeless while reflecting the green eyes that had captivated him from their first meeting. "I'm not asking you to be mine, little bird," Marcus continued, using the endearment that had evolved from his initial possessive instincts into a term of affection that celebrated rather than diminished Emma's freedom. "I'm asking if you'll let me be yours, if you'll trust me to love you without trying to control you, to support your dreams while pursuing my own." Emma's response came through laughter and tears as she pulled Marcus to his feet and kissed him with the passion that had grown steadily stronger as their relationship had deepened through shared challenges and mutual respect. "Yes," Emma whispered against his lips, her voice carrying joy that seemed to illuminate the entire harbor. "Yes to partnership, yes to love, yes to building something beautiful together while remaining ourselves." As Marcus slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, he realized that his transformation was complete. The man who had once believed that love meant possession had learned that true intimacy required the courage to remain vulnerable while supporting someone else's strength and independence. Harbor Falls had prospered under their joint leadership, with Marcus's shipping operations and Emma's restaurant serving as anchors for economic development that enhanced rather than replaced the community's authentic character. Local businesses thrived, property values increased sustainably, and young families began moving to Harbor Falls for opportunities that combined professional advancement with small-town quality of life. The couple's engagement party was held at the Clearwater Inn, with the entire community gathering to celebrate not just their personal happiness, but the successful preservation of Harbor Falls' independence in the face of corporate pressure. Tom Bradley offered a toast that summarized what everyone understood about Marcus and Emma's relationship. "To Marcus and Emma," Tom said, raising his glass of Emma's specially selected champagne, "who proved that the strongest partnerships are built on mutual respect rather than mutual dependence, and who showed all of us that fighting for what matters most is always worth the risk." As the celebration continued around them, Marcus and Emma stood together on the inn's deck, watching fishing boats return to harbor while planning a future that would honor both their individual dreams and their shared commitment to the community that had brought them together. "I love you, Emma Whitmore," Marcus said, his voice carrying wonder at the depth of feeling that partnership with an equal had made possible. "And I love you, Marcus Kane," Emma replied, her smile reflecting contentment that came from being cherished. Rather than possessed, supported rather than controlled. The man whose boots had once been made for walking away had finally learned the difference between taking what he wanted and earning what he needed. Marcus Kane had discovered that the greatest strength lay not in commanding others but in loving someone brave enough to challenge him to become better than he had ever imagined possible. Harbor Falls settled into its evening rhythms around them, a community preserved and strengthened by two people who had learned that the most beautiful things in life could only be built together, with patience, respect, and the wisdom to know. That love meant setting each other free to soar while choosing to fly side by side. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out,